So what would be the perfect bet that you could place? It would be a bet that was completely risk-free, where you would only profit and there was no potential for downside. And this is something that I've done throughout my career that is still possible today. And that is arbitrage betting. You tend to see a similar form of betting pop up nowadays in the form of matched betting, which is where you take an offer that's been given by a bookmaker or sportsbook and then you offset the risk somewhere else. It's the perfect way to be able to place a bet, but the problem is you can't really scale it because you're likely to be banned by a sportsbook or bookmaker when they identify that this is the type of activity that you are doing. However, I came across this problem many years ago and solved it in the most unusual of ways. If you're interested in learning to use BetAngel, head on over to our website where you can download a free trial. If you're interested in learning how to use it, then head over to the BetAngel Academy where you can do exactly that. And if you want to talk to like-minded people, then head on over to our forum. So I've had a very long and varied career in sports betting. It started in the late 80s when I started analysing football matches with the intention of being able to win on the football pools. I figured out that if I was just a little bit better than other people, that would probably be good enough, and that's exactly the scenario that unfolded. And then I eventually progressed from that, if you can call it a progression, to going to bookmakers and trying to find value bets and so on with bookmakers. But I realized that there was a discrepancy in the way that bookmakers did a number of things, and I figured out that very often you can actually go to one bookmaker, we're talking this is a few years ago, you could go to one bookmaker and they would have a different price from another. And I began to realize that if I did that, and if I took the early coupons on, for example, football matches, I could actually create positions within the market that basically meant that I couldn't lose. And in fact, I would get a small profit when one of those positions actually came in. This was classic arbitrage betting. And basically you can do this in a number of ways, but the concept between an arbitrage bet, to simplify matters for you, is let's say we have a tennis match, for example, and you can back one player at 1.5 in decimal odds, and you can find a better price somewhere else for the second player, say at odds of 4, you can actually place a bet into the market with different stakes to ensure that you profit regardless of who goes on to win that particular tennis match. And you can do the same in a whole variety of sports. You could do it in tennis and cricket, horse racing. There's many different ways in which you can do this, but it basically involves trying to find the best price that you can somewhere and then trying to hedge that position some other way. And this was pretty much where I started my entire career. It was with traditional bookmakers. This is pre-internet days. I was either finding value, doing loads of clever bets, or arbing. And I was basically looking for the best price that I could possibly find and then hedging that somewhere else. So everything changed for arbitrage betting, and in fact the entire sports betting industry in the year 2000 when betting exchanges were born. Betting exchanges gave you the ability to back on something, so you could basically win if it went on to win, or you could back on something to lose. You could lay on a betting exchange. And for the world of arbitraging, this changed everything, because I could suddenly go out and look for the best prices somewhere and then just lay it off on the exchange. I didn't have to go to another bookmaker. I could actually put it on to the exchange. But better than that, you could create all sorts of opportunities, because on an exchange you weren't obliged to be able to just take the price that you wanted. You could actually offer a price up. So I started to do clever things, such as actually put a bet into the order queue and wait for somebody else to get matched, because on betting exchanges you were matching against other people with opposing opinions. You weren't up against a bookmaker, and you could actually say, well, I'm not happy with odds of 3 to 1, I want 4 to 1, and you could actually offer that bet to the exchange and wait for it to be matched. So that vastly expanded the whole range of opportunities that you could do with arbitrage betting. But there was a problem, however, and that was that if you used a bookmaker to get the best possible price, you could still have a problem. It wasn't entirely risk-free. So I'd always had this counterparty risk within my arbitrage, and I was always looking for ways to try and limit that. But one day I just came up with a bright idea of, why don't I go on the exchange and place 2 bets at different prices, and if the 2 of them match, it's basically the same as me hunting around looking for a bookmaker price and then laying it off on the exchange. All I can do is just put both bets on the exchange. I don't need to do anything else. And miraculously it worked, and all of a sudden I netted a profit. I did another one today for the purposes of this video, where I just basically went into the market, backed something at a higher price, laid it at a lower price, and hey presto, there was my free bet, exactly the same way that I did it over 20 years ago. And you can imagine that my mind was blown away when this happened back then. I mean, it seems very common nowadays, but of course nobody was doing it. There was no information. There was no evidence that anybody else was doing it. I did worry actually whether maybe I'd found a loophole and that loophole was going to get closed, or my account would be blatted, or I'd get a phone call saying, hey, stop doing this. Because my mind was blown. Suddenly I could, in theory, do arbitrage on the exchange. Could offer up two different prices, net the profit between the two, and wow, all of a sudden there was money in my account. And you can imagine my mind was completely blown when all of a sudden I figured out that you could hedge that position to win whatever the result. You didn't even need for the result to come in. It became result independent. You could actually place another bet into the market, and then all of a sudden you'd have a profit regardless of who went on to win. Suddenly I was just thinking, wow, what an opportunity. And it was such an opportunity that I actually quit my job and thought, well, I'm going to do this full time. Because from then on in, it was like, well, just how far can I push this? Now, the interesting thing about doing arbitrage betting and so on is that it's basically, Betfair trading is a subset of that. You have to take slightly more risk, but with traditional arbitrage betting, you're going to be limited, blocked, restricted by bookmakers, you're going to run out of accounts and so on. But when you're doing Betfair trading, basically you're betting into a pool of 50 to 60 billion pounds worth of business a year, so the scale of it is almost unlimited. But of course you do have to take a little bit of risk with that. But fundamentally the two are very, very similar. And if you look at where I started, I was using tens and £20 when I first started doing arbitrage betting, but now my objective is to try and do and put through as much money as possible. So it's very easy for me in the summer to match millions a week, simply because the markets are that big and they have that opportunity within them. It is possible to do all of those things. But the funny thing is that bookmakers are still quite slow. If you wanted to try and do an arbitrage bet nowadays, it's still possible to do that because the odds on the exchange move much faster than they do with a bookmaker. And what I actually did when I was recording this video, or just before I recorded this video, was I actually went on to Bet365, found something that was at a bigger price in a horse race, and laid it off on Betfair. It's exactly the same thing that I did all those years ago, 23 years ago, and it is still possible to do it nowadays. Now, of course, bookmakers don't particularly like that, and they can spot really sharp accounts very, very quickly. So I imagine while you can do that, the problem that you will have is that you're going to get your account limited or restricted in some way. I would imagine that will happen fairly quickly if you try and take advantage of that. But when we look at the fundamental process, that's essentially exactly the same as what we're doing, apart from when you're actively trading, you're effectively just arbing on the exchange. You have to take a little bit of risk, but the potential reward is infinitely higher. So from that point onwards, it was just, the sky's the limit. How far can I actively take this? But fundamentally speaking, what you're looking at now and what I've just described is Betfair trading. But for me, when I started, I just considered it a variation on arbitrage betting. I basically figured out that if I could put two bets in the market and get them matched, then that would generate the profit. And so my focus from that point onwards was how far can I push it? How big can I push it? How can I do it more effectively? How many sports can I do it in? And the sort of thing steamrolled from there. It just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And if you look at what I do now during the summer, I will trade millions through the market a week. But it all started from that very simple base, and it just gradually grew and grew over time. And of course other things happened, because when I first started, I was doing things manually, and I figured out if I could just use a bit of software, that would help. And that was where BetAngel came into the equation, because BetAngel would allow me to do this much faster, more effectively than other people within the market, and more importantly on a much, much bigger scale. So BetAngel started off as a simple tool, and it's now grown into something much, much bigger. And of course you've got automated betting, you've got modeling tools and all sorts of stuff, but it's all geared around that really simple principle of how can you get two bets matched in this particular market. That fundamental principle hasn't changed basically from the first time that I ever did it, and it was based around doing arbitrage. And I've always sort of seen trading as a variation of that, really, as opposed to an outright strategy itself, because that's where its roots were. My whole career seems to have been spent just trying to figure out how to get two prices matched, basically. But yeah, from those very simple beginnings, we ended up to pretty much where we are today.